She hid in the Korean Mafia boss's car to escape her abusive ex. He whispered, "I'll protect you." Honestly, I didn't know the man sitting in the dark corner of that luxury sedan was the most dangerous criminal in the city. I only knew that the man hunting me down the street was going to trade my body to pay off his gambling debts. If the idea of escaping a monster only to land in the lap of a dragon makes your heart race, hit that like button. Subscribe right now and tell us your city and the time you are watching, because the choice I make in the next 10 seconds changes my life forever. The bruise on my upper arm was yellowing, looking like a fading map of where Kyle's fingers had dug in 3 days ago because I bought the wrong coffee brand. That was my life. A calculated navigation of eggshells, ensuring my breathing wasn't too loud. I stayed because I believed him when he said no one else would want someone like me. Someone who took up too much space, whose weight was his favorite weapon to use against her self-worth. I stayed until this morning, when I found the burner phone taped beneath the bathroom sink. It was full of texts about selling me. He wasn't just going to hurt me this time. He was going to trade me. That was the catalyst. The sheer, cold terror overrode 5 years of conditioning. I ran with nothing but the clothes on my back, escaping our suffocating basement apartment. I made it 3 blocks before I heard his vintage Camaro roaring down the street, hunting me. Panic strips you of logic. I dove into the underground parking garage of the encrypted Eclipse Hotel, a place way out of my league, praying the shadows would swallow me whole. My lungs burned, my heavy frame shuddering with every gasp. Kyle's engine echoed off the concrete walls, getting closer. I was trapped. That's when I saw it. A polished black sedan, its rear door slightly ajar. I didn't think. I just shoved myself inside, tumbling onto the plush leather floorboards, curling into the smallest ball my size allowed. I jammed myself between the front and back seats. I smelled expensive leather, faint cigarette smoke, and something sharp, like steel. I lay there, heart hammering against my ribs, listening to the garage sounds. Then voices. Sharp, clipped Korean tones that held an authority I had never heard before. The rear door, right next to my head, swung open. The man who slid into the seat above me didn't notice me immediately. He was on the phone, his voice a low monotone. I dared to peek. An expensive suit, immaculate cuff links, and on the hand resting on his knee, a hand that looked like it could crush stone. A sprawling, vibrant tattoo of a coiled dragon peeked out. He radiated a terrifying stillness. He ended the call and shifted. That's when he saw me. I stopped breathing. I expected shouting. I expected to be dragged out by my hair and tossed onto the concrete. Instead, there was silence. He looked down at me, his eyes dark, hooded, and utterly unreadable. There was no shock on his face, only a clinical assessment. He took in my tear-streaked face, the cheap, torn t-shirt, and the sheer terror vibrating off me. He didn't look at me with disgust, the way Kyle did. He looked at me like I was a misplaced object that had suddenly become interesting. Before he could speak, a shadow fell over the car window. My blood turned to ice. Kyle. He was outside, his face pressed against the tinted glass, his eyes wild. He couldn't see in clearly, but he knew I was nearby. He started banging on the glass, shouting obscenities that were muffled by the sedan's soundproofing, but I knew every word by heart. Alicia, get your fat ass out here. I know you're hiding. I whimpered, a pathetic sound that escaped before I could stop it. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the inevitable pain. I was waiting for this stranger to throw me to the wolf to save his upholstery. The Korean man didn't move. He didn't flinch at the banging. He just watched me. He saw the way I flinched with every thump against the glass, the way I tried to make myself disappear into the floor mats. The banging stopped. I heard Kyle screaming at someone else, probably the hotel security. The stranger above me leaned down. The scent of danger and expensive cologne washed over me. His voice was barely a whisper, but it was heavier than any shout Kyle had ever produced. It was a voice used to giving orders that determined life or death. Stay down, he commanded, not unkindly. Then, he did something that altered the axis of my world. He reached down, his large hand hovering for a second before gently, almost hesitatingly, resting on my trembling shoulder. It wasn't a grope. It was a weight, a grounding force. He will not touch you again, he whispered, the promise vibrating through his hand into my bones. I'll protect you. He tapped the partition glass. The car glided forward, smooth and silent as a predator. I stayed curled on the floor, feeling the hum of the engine beneath me, weeping silently as we drove past a furious, impotent Kyle. I was being taken from one cage, I knew, but I had no idea the kind of gilded fortress I was entering. I looked up at the man who had just saved me. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw set, looking like a king who had just acquired a new, troublesome territory. We drove for 40 minutes in absolute silence. I was too terrified to move from the floorboards, my body aching from the tension. Eventually, the car slowed and descended. The darkness outside the tinted windows was replaced by harsh, artificial brightness. When the car finally stopped, the door opened, and his hand was there again. It wasn't demanding this time. It was offering assistance. I crawled out, my knees weak and shaking. I felt a deep, burning shame about my size and my disheveled state. I stood up and finally looked at my savior fully. He was devastatingly handsome, with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 violent secrets. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, but his energy was ancient. He was Jong-hoon. I would learn that name later, whispered with fear by powerful men. We were in the private underground garage of a penthouse tower that pierced the city skyline. It was sterilized, bright, and secure. 2 other men in dark suits were waiting by an elevator. They bowed low, a full 90 degrees, when Jong-hoon emerged. They barely glanced at me, as if my presence was already expected, already managed. Take her to the guest suite in the East Wing, Jong-hoon ordered one of the men in Korean. Then he switched to perfect, slightly accented English for me. He looked me right in the eye. You are safe here. No one enters this building without my permission, and no one leaves with my property. Property. The word chilled me to the bone, yet strangely, it didn't terrify me like it would have coming from Kyle. With Kyle, being property meant being a punching bag, something to be used and discarded. With Jong-hoon, it sounded different. It sounded like being placed in a vault. It sounded like value. I was led away from him, down long corridors of glass and steel. The penthouse was a sprawling palace. I was shown to a room that was bigger than my entire old apartment. The guard pointed to a closet filled with clothes made of silk that felt like water against my fingers. I was left alone in the silence. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the city below. I felt like a prized, exotic bird caught in a net, waiting for the collector to decide what to do with me. I wasn't free, not really. I had just traded a cage of rust for a cage of gold. The first week was a blur of luxury and isolation. I didn't see Jong-hoon. I was guarded by silent, efficient men who catered to my needs, but offered no conversation. I learned the truth from the news reports on the massive television in my suite. A gang-related massacre at a downtown warehouse had dominated the headlines for 2 days. The police were looking for leads. The victims were low-level loan sharks and human traffickers. And among the missing, presumed dead, Kyle. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I knew, with chilling certainty, that Jong-hoon hadn't just rescued me. He had erased the threat. The next evening, I was summoned to his private study. It was a dark room smelling of old books and power. He was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, the city lights glittering behind him like diamonds he owned. He stood when I entered, his presence filling the room. You've seen the news, he stated. It was not a question. Did you kill him? I asked, my voice shaking. I hated that a part of me felt relief. Jong-hoon walked around the desk, closing the distance between us. Up close, the intensity of his gaze was almost unbearable. He didn't answer directly. The debt he owed was not financial. He was selling something that wasn't his to sell. He offended me. He stopped inches from me. For the first time, I felt a different kind of tension. It wasn't fear of violence, but an electric, simmering awareness of his proximity. He looked me up and down, slowly, deliberately, taking in every curve that Kyle had made me hate. But in Jong-hoon's eyes, I didn't see repulsion. I saw possession. You were brave in that car, Alicia, he said softly, using my name for the first time. It sounded like a prayer in his deep voice. Terror makes most people stupid. You stayed quiet. You survived. He reached out and touched a bruise on my jaw, a parting gift from Kyle. His thumb traced the outline of it, his touch feather-light, agonizingly gentle against the memory of the violence. Why did you save me? I whispered. I'm nobody. I gestured vaguely at my body. His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of anger crossing his face, but not directed at me. You think your value lies in how little space you occupy? That man broke you to make himself feel tall. I don't need to break things to know my power. He stepped closer, his heat radiating toward me. I kept you because when I looked in your eyes in that garage, I saw a will to live that matched my own. And because... He paused, his gaze dropping to my lips, then back up to my eyes. Because I decided I wanted you. It wasn't a romantic declaration. It was a statement of fact. A warlord claiming territory. You are mine now, Alicia. That phrase echoed in my head for the next 24 hours, bouncing around my skull like a coin in a metal can. I didn't know if I should feel safe or suffocated. The answer came the next night, not with a threat, but with a dress. A silent maid laid it out on the bed. It was a deep navy silk, elegant and expensive, but it was sleeveless. I stared at it, my stomach twisting. Carl had trained me to cover up. He told me my arms were too big, too flabby, too ugly to be seen. But more than that, my upper arms were a canvas of old bruises and fading yellow marks. Wearing this meant showing the map of my shame. When I walked into the dining room, I felt naked. Jong-hoon was already seated at the head of a table long enough to seat 20 people. He dismissed the staff with a wave of his hand, leaving us alone in the cavernous room. The silence was loud. I sat to his right, staring at the gourmet spread, steak, roasted vegetables, rich sauces. I didn't move to serve myself. Jong-hoon watched me over the rim of his wine glass. You aren't eating. I'm not. I'm not that hungry. I lied. The truth was, I was calculating calories. Carl used to pinch my waist before dinner and tell me I had had enough before I even took a bite. The old voice was still screaming in my head. Jong-hoon set his glass down. The sound was sharp against the wood. He stood up, picked up his own fork and knife, and walked over to me. I flinched, expecting him to critique my appearance. Instead, he cut a piece of the prime steak from the platter and placed it directly onto my empty plate. Eat, he commanded softly. In this house, hunger is an insult to the provider. You do not need to shrink to fit into my world, Alicia. You are here to take up space. I looked up at him, shocked. He wasn't looking at my scars with disgust. He was looking at my empty plate with anger, not at me, but at the reason I was starving myself. I took a bite. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. I don't know how to do this, I admitted, my voice trembling. I don't know how to be a kept woman. You are not kept, he corrected, his voice dropping an octave. You are shielded. There is a difference. The next morning, the gilded cage opened, but only slightly. Jong-hoon decided that my wardrobe was insufficient for my new station. He didn't ask if I wanted to go shopping. He simply announced that we were leaving. We took the black sedan to the most expensive fashion district in the city. The buildings were all glass and chrome, screaming wealth. When we pulled up to a boutique that looked more like a museum than a store, Jong-hoon didn't get out. He was on a call, speaking rapid-fire Korean with a look of intense concentration. Go inside, he told me, handing me a black credit card that felt heavier than steel. My guard will stand by the door. Get whatever you want. I walked in, feeling like an imposter in my own skin. The air inside smelled like money. 2 sales assistants, young women with sharp eyes and fake smiles, looked up. Their smiles dropped instantly when they saw me. I wasn't their usual clientele. I was a plus-sized black woman wearing borrowed clothes, walking into a store where the mannequins were size 0. I browsed a rack of coats, trying to find my size. One of the assistants approached. She didn't offer to help. She stood too close, her arms crossed. We don't carry sizes for your body type here, she said, her voice dripping with polite venom. The discount outlet in the basement across the street might have something that fits. My face burned. It was the same humiliation I had felt 1,000 times before. I started to back away, mumbling an apology, ready to flee. Then, the bell above the door chimed. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Jong-hoon walked in. He must have seen my face through the window. He didn't look at the clothes. He looked at the sales assistant. Is there a problem? His voice was quiet, deadly. No, sir. The girl stammered, flushing pink. We were just advising the lady on our sizing. Jong-hoon didn't yell. He turned to the manager who had rushed over. Pull the sales records for the last hour. I am buying every item in this store's current inventory. The manager gasped. Sir. Everything, he repeated. Except for her job. He pointed at the rude girl. Fire her. Now. Or I burn this building's reputation to the ground by morning. The girl was sobbing within seconds. Jong-hoon turned to me, ignoring the chaos he had just caused. He reached out and lifted my chin with his finger, forcing me to look him in the eye. Do not lower your head, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You are with me, and anyone who disrespects you is disrespecting the hand that feeds this city. He didn't just buy me clothes. He bought my dignity back. I realized then that his protection wasn't passive. It was a weapon, and he had just fired the first shot. While Jong-hoon was gone, the penthouse felt less like a fortress and more like a tomb. I couldn't just sit around and wait to be fed like a pampered pet. My trauma response has always been to be useful, to earn my space so I wouldn't be discarded. I found my way into his private library, a massive room lined with books that looked like they cost more than my old apartment. I started organizing. It was busy work, but it kept my hands from shaking. I was stacking files on the mahogany desk when a manila folder slid out from the bottom of a pile. It hit the floor with a soft slap. I bent down to pick it up and froze. The label on the tab didn't say logistics or shipping. It said Kyle. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew that in a house like this, curiosity was dangerous. But I opened it. It wasn't a police report. It was a debt ledger. I scanned the pages, my breath catching in my throat. Kyle hadn't just owed money to random loan sharks. The headers on the spreadsheets were stamped with a red symbol, a lotus flower wrapped in iron chains. The Iron Lotus. It was a rival syndicate. The numbers were staggering. Kyle had gambled away everything he had, and then he had borrowed against me. But the last page was the one that made the room spin. It was a transfer document. It showed the total debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars, stamped, paid in full. The signature at the bottom was elegant and sharp, Young Jong-hoon. The date was from the day he found me in the car. I dropped the file on the desk. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Jong-hoon hadn't just saved me out of the kindness of his heart. He hadn't just stumbled upon a woman in distress. He had bought me. He had paid off the Iron Lotus to acquire Kyle's debt, which meant he legally owned the collateral. Me. I sank into the leather chair, clutching the paper. The feeling of safety I had started to build evaporated instantly. I wasn't a guest here. I was a transaction. I was an asset acquired in a hostile takeover. The kindness at dinner, the defense at the boutique. Was that just him taking care of his investment? Was I just a piece of expensive property that he needed to polish before he put it to use? I sat there in the darkening room, the city lights flickering on outside, waiting for the sound of the elevator. I needed to look him in the eye. I needed to know if I was a person to him, or if I was just a line item on a spreadsheet that he had decided to settle. The dragon had saved me from the wolf, yes. But dragons don't save princesses for free. They keep them in their towers for a reason. I didn't have to wait long, but it wasn't Jong-hoon who found me. The heavy double doors of the library swung open, and a woman walked in. I recognized her from the brief interactions I'd seen in the hallway. This was Director Min, Jong-hoon's second-in-command. She was terrifyingly beautiful, with sharp features and a suit that cost more than my life's earnings. She didn't look at me with curiosity. She looked at me with cold, hard disdain. She saw the open file on the desk immediately. A cruel, small smile played on her red lips. "So, you found the receipt," she said, her voice smooth and cold as glass. She walked over, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor like gunshots. I was wondering how long it would take. "He bought the debt," I whispered, standing up to face her. "Why?" Min laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think he did it because he likes you? Don't be naive, Alicia. Jong-hoon doesn't bring strays home. He doesn't make emotional decisions. He is a tactician." She circled me, looking me up and down. "The Iron Lotus has been trying to encroach on our territory for months. They used your ex-boyfriend to launder money. By buying his debt, Jong-hoon didn't just get you. He got a legal claim to their operation. You aren't a girlfriend. You aren't a guest. You are bait." My stomach turned over. "Bait? The Iron Lotus will come for you to save face," Min hissed, leaning in close. "And when they do, Jong-hoon will be waiting to crush them. You are just the cheese in the trap. Don't mistake a tactical move for affection. Once the war is over, you will be discarded." She turned and walked out, leaving me shattering into a million pieces. The Cinderella fantasy was dead. I was just a pawn in a war between monsters. Minutes later, the elevator chimed. Jong-hoon walked in. He looked exhausted, smelling of rain and gunpowder. He loosened his tie, his eyes searching for me. When he saw me standing by the desk, he took a step forward, his face softening. "Alicia," he started. I flinched away from him, backing up against the bookshelf. The hurt on his face was instant, but before either of us could speak, the room was bathed in flashing red light. A high-pitched alarm screamed through the penthouse. "Stay back," Jong-hoon roared, his demeanor shifting instantly from tired man to lethal protector. He pulled a gun from his waistband and moved in front of me. Security guards burst into the room. One of them held a small, wrapped box that had been left at the front gate. It wasn't a bomb. Jong-hoon took it, his face grim. He opened it slowly. Inside lay a cheap, tarnished ring. My old wedding band. The one Kyle had pawned a year ago. There was a note tucked inside. "A debt is never fully paid." The Iron Lotus knew I was here. Min was right. The war had arrived. Is Director Min telling the truth? Is Alicia just bait for a war? Or is she the prize he's willing to start a war for? Hit the like button if you think he's falling for her. Subscribe and comment your theory, bait or beloved. The answer in the next chapter will shock you. The red emergency lights stopped pulsing, replaced by the stark, white brightness of the main overheads. The security team retreated to the perimeter, leaving us alone in the center of the library. The silence that followed the alarm was heavy, filled with the scent of fear and old paper. The manila folder, the evidence of my purchase, lay on the desk between us like a loaded weapon. Is it true? I asked, my voice barely steady. I pointed a trembling finger at the file. Director Min said you bought that debt to own a piece of the Iron Lotus. She said I'm just a chess piece. Am I just bait to you, Jong-hoon? Jong-hoon looked at the file, then at the door where Min had exited, his jaw tightening until a muscle feathering in his cheek jumped. He did. Min is useful, but she is jealous, he said, his voice low and vibrating with controlled anger. She sees the world in assets and liabilities. She cannot understand why I broke my own rule. What rule? I demanded. I never bring work home, he said, finally looking at me. The intensity in his dark eyes knocked the wind out of me. And I never let liabilities live. If you were just a tool, Alicia, I would have left you in that garage. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a gold lighter. He didn't hesitate. He flicked the wheel, and a blue flame sprang to life. He held the corner of the debt ledger to the fire. We both watched as the paper curled, turning black and brittle. The record of my sale, the proof of my shame, disintegrated into ash right there in his hand before he dropped the burning remains into a metal waste bin. I bought the debt so no one else could claim you, he said, stepping over the ashes to stand directly in front of me. I cleared the ledger so you would belong to no one, not even me, unless you chose to. He reached out, taking my hand. His skin was rough, warm, and real. You are not bait, Alicia. Bait is disposable. You are the only thing in this entire city I am afraid to lose. The wall around my heart crumbled. He wasn't using me to win a war. He was starting a war to keep me. For the first time since I climbed into his car, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt precious. But looking at the resolve in his eyes, I knew that being precious to a dragon came with a terrible price. The Iron Lotus wasn't attacking us because of money anymore. They were attacking because he had made it personal. The ring was a declaration of war, and Jong-hoon intended to answer it. The next morning, the penthouse was buzzing with activity. Men in suits were checking weapons, and the air crackled with tension. The Iron Lotus had come out of the shadows, and to stop them, Jong-hoon had to attend the Midnight Gala, a neutral ground for the underworld elite, to face their leader, Chairman Vong. You will stay in the panic room, Jong-hoon ordered, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. It has independent air filtration and reinforced steel walls. No, I said. He stopped, turning slowly to look at me. He wasn't used to being told no. I'm going with you, I stated, standing my ground. My hands were shaking, but my voice was firm. I went through Kyle's files, Jong-hoon. I know the shell companies the Iron Lotus uses to move their money. I know their logistics. If you go alone, it's a standoff. If I go with you, I can point out the men who don't belong. He looked at me, really looked at me, assessing my strength. He didn't see a broken woman anymore. He saw a partner. It is dangerous, he warned. If bullets fly, I cannot guarantee I can stop them all. I survived 5 years with a monster, I said. I can handle a dinner party. A slow, proud smile touched his lips. Then go get dressed. We leave in an hour. The dress was emerald velvet, deep and rich, hugging every curve I used to hide. It had long sleeves that covered my bruises, high-necked and regal. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the frightened girl from the basement apartment. I saw a queen preparing for battle. Walking into the gala on his arm was like stepping into a lion's den. The ballroom was filled with the city's most dangerous people. The music stopped the moment we entered. Hundreds of eyes turned to us. They looked at Jong-hoon, the dragon of soul, and then they looked at me. A plus-sized black woman standing tall beside the most powerful man in the room. I heard the whispers. I saw the sneers. But then I felt Jong-hoon's hand tighten on my waist, pulling me flush against his side. It was a possessive, defiant grip. He walked us through the crowd, parting them like the Red Sea. He wasn't hiding me. He was parading me. Keep your head up, he whispered against my ear, his breath hot on my skin. Let them see what a real queen looks like. We reached the center of the room. Across the floor, an older man with cold, reptile eyes raised a glass to us. It was Chairman Vong. He smiled, looking at me like I was a mouse that had walked straight into a trap. But he didn't know that mice learn how to bite. The gala was suffocating. The air smelled of expensive perfume and hidden malice. Even though Jong-hoon held me close, his body a solid wall of heat against mine, I felt the cold stares of 100 people who wanted us dead. Polite conversation masked death threats here. I stood beside him, clutching a glass of champagne I had no intention of drinking, my eyes darting around the room. My years with Kyle had taught me one thing: hypervigilance. I knew how to read a room for danger before the first blow was thrown. I watched the staff. The waiters were moving too fast. They were rotating near our section of the balcony far too frequently. A man with a tray of hors d'oeuvres made eye contact with Chairman Vong across the room. It was a micro-expression, a tiny nod, but I saw it. Jong-hoon, I whispered, squeezing his arm. The waiter, the one with the scar on his neck. He's circling us. I see him, Jong-hoon murmured, his body tensing like a coiled spring. Stay behind me. But he was looking at the waiter on the floor. He wasn't looking up. I glanced toward the mezzanine level, where the lighting rig was set up. A glint of metal caught the light. Then I saw it. A tiny, red laser appeared on the lapel of Jong-hoon's tuxedo jacket, right over his heart. Panic didn't freeze me this time. It moved me. Get down, I screamed. I didn't think. I didn't wait for him to protect me. I threw my entire body weight against him, shoving him hard to the right. The crack of the sniper rifle echoed like thunder in the ballroom. The champagne glass in Jong-hoon's hand shattered, exploding into 1,000 glittering shards where his chest had been a second ago. Screams erupted. The crowd surged in a wave of terrified silk and tuxedos. We hit the marble floor hard, the impact knocking the breath out of me. Jong-hoon didn't stay down. He rolled instantly, covering my body with his own, shielding me from the chaos. In one fluid motion, he pulled a silver handgun from inside his jacket. His face, usually so composed, was twisted into a mask of pure, terrifying rage. The dragon had been unleashed. Move, he roared, hauling me to my feet. He fired 2 shots toward the mezzanine, suppressing the sniper, then dragged me toward the kitchen exit. He wasn't just defending himself. He was possessed. I looked at him as we ran, seeing the way he scanned for threats, the way he kept his body between me and the open room. He was ready to burn the world down because someone dared to aim at us. For the first time, the danger wasn't just around us. It was coming from him. I realized then that I hadn't just saved a man. I had uncaged a beast that was about to consume everything in its path to keep me safe. We didn't take the main elevator. We scrambled through the kitchen, slipping on spilled wine and broken glass, bursting out into the loading dock where a nondescript gray van was waiting. It wasn't the luxury sedan. This was an escape vehicle. The driver, a man I didn't recognize, threw the back doors open, and we dove inside just as bullets sparked against the concrete wall behind us. The drive was frantic. Jong-hoon didn't let go of me for a second. We sped away from the glittering city center, heading toward the dark, industrial outline of the shipping docks. This was the underbelly of his world, a place of rust and shadows. We stopped at a stack of shipping containers that had been converted into a makeshift safe house. It was cold, smelling of salt water and oil. Inside, there was a cot, a table, and a first aid kit. It was a stark, gritty contrast to the penthouse luxury we had left behind an hour ago. Are you hurt? Jong-hoon demanded, his hands roaming over my arms and shoulders, checking for injuries. I'm fine. I panted, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I'm okay. You're bleeding, he said, his voice cracking. I looked down. A jagged tear in my velvet sleeve was soaked in dark red. I must have cut my arm on the debris when we hit the floor. I hadn't even felt it. Jong-hoon grabbed the medical kit. He sat me down on the cot and began to cut away the ruined fabric. His hands, which had been steady enough to fire a gun moments ago, were shaking. You pushed me, he whispered, dabbing antiseptic on the graze. He looked up, his dark eyes wide with a mixture of awe and horror. You saw the laser. You saved my life, Alicia. I couldn't let them take you, I said simply. He stopped cleaning the wound. He dropped the gauze and cupped my face with his blood-stained hands. I am supposed to be the shield, he choked out. Not you. Never you. The intimacy of the moment was overwhelming. In this rusted metal box, stripped of his wealth and his suits, he was just a terrified man holding the woman he loved. Then, the lights cut out. The container was plunged into darkness. A second later, red emergency strobes began to flash, accompanied by the hiss of electronic locks sealing the heavy metal doors. Jong-hoon stood up instantly, pushing me behind him. He checked his phone. No signal. The driver, he growled. He's gone. We weren't safe. We had been herded here. The sound of heavy boots on metal echoed outside, surrounding us. The Iron Lotus hadn't missed at the gala. They had just forced us into a smaller cage. There was no way out. The air inside the container was freezing, stinging my exposed skin. Outside, the heavy thud of boots stopped. Silence fell, which was worse than the noise. It meant they were getting into position. They were setting up a kill box. Jong-hoon turned to me. The panic was gone from his face, replaced by a terrifying calm. He reached behind his back and pulled out a heavy black pistol. He pressed it into my shaking hands. The metal was warm from his body heat. Listen to me, he said, his voice steady. There is a hatch in the floor behind those crates. It drops into the drainage tunnel. When I open the door, they will focus on me. You drop down. You run. No, I whispered, clutching the gun. I'm not leaving you. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip hard. This isn't a negotiation, Alicia. I bought your debt to give you a life, not a death sentence. If anyone comes through that hatch who isn't me, you empty the magazine. Do not hesitate. I realized then what he was doing. He wasn't formulating a strategy to win. He was planning a sacrifice to let me escape. The transaction was over. This wasn't business. This was love. He leaned in, pressing his forehead against mine for a split second. A silent goodbye. Then he turned. He kicked the heavy metal door open and sprinted out into the darkness, firing 2 shots into the air to draw their attention. Gunfire erupted immediately, a deafening roar that shook the walls. I didn't go for the hatch. I couldn't. I dropped the gun and scrambled up the rusty maintenance ladder attached to the wall, climbing toward the crane controls overhead. I pushed open the top grate and crawled into the operator's cab. Below me, the dock was a chaotic scene of muzzle flashes. I saw Jong-hoon pinned behind a stack of pallets, outnumbered. And then I saw him. The driver, the man who had brought us here. He was flanking Jong-hoon, moving silently through the shadows with a shotgun raised, aiming at Jong-hoon's exposed back. Jong-hoon didn't see him. He was focused on the men in front. He was seconds away from execution. He walked into fire for me. Now, I have 1 second to save his life. If you believe loyalty is worth dying for, hit the like button right now. Subscribe, because what I do next changes the history of the Young Syndicate forever. I grabbed the heavy control levers. They were cold and stiff with age. I looked down at the traitor aiming at the man who had given me back my dignity. I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt a cold, hard rage. I wasn't just a survivor. I was the dragon's partner. I gripped the controls. I slammed the lever forward with both hands, screaming with the effort. The hydraulic gears of the massive crane groaned, a screech of metal on metal that tore through the night. The heavy steel shipping container dangling from the cables swung violently to the left. The driver looked up too late. The corner of the multi-ton container smashed into him and the stack of crates he was using for cover. The impact shook the ground like an earthquake. Wood splintered, metal shrieked, and the traitor was buried instantly under a mountain of debris. The battlefield went silent for a heartbeat. Everyone froze. Jong-hoon turned. He looked up at the crane, seeing the container swaying, seeing me in the cab, realizing I hadn't run, realizing I had fought. That moment changed him. Seeing me intervene triggered something primal. He didn't cover his head or retreat. He moved. The dragon was fully unleashed. He vaulted over the pallets, moving with a speed and violence that was terrifying to watch. He closed the distance on the remaining 3 assassins before they could recover from the shock. It was brutal. It was efficient. It was final. He didn't fire his weapon again. He used his hands, his knife, his rage. Within 30 seconds, the dock was silent. The only sound was the creaking of the crane cables swaying in the wind, and my own ragged breathing fogging up the glass of the operator's cab. Jong-hoon stood amidst the carnage. He walked over to the crushed debris where the driver lay. He didn't look away. He confirmed the kill with a cold, impassive stare. Then, he holstered his weapon and looked up at me. I climbed down the ladder, my legs feeling like jelly. I hit the concrete and stumbled. I expected him to be angry that I disobeyed him. I expected him to yell at me for putting myself in danger. He walked toward me, his expensive